Welcome to the Breakdown with INFB. We're your hosts, Garrett Kelly
and Heidi Gant.
On today's episode, we're going to discuss estate and succession planning, a key topic for farm families to consider. The average age of a farmer in the U.S. is 58 years old, and as farmers continue to age, proper succession planning is crucial to help protect the farm and ensure a smooth transition to the next generation.
Today, we're joined by John Shoup, director of the Indiana Agricultural Law Foundation, and Clint Fischer, an attorney at Ribstein and Hogan Law Firm, a firm based in South Dakota that specializes in helping family farms navigate the often daunting process of farm succession planning. So welcome, Clint. Welcome, John.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm excited to be on here and talk about this topic.
Great. It's nice to have somebody who's excited to be on, that's for sure. Let's start by learning a bit about both of you and your roles. So John, tell us maybe a little bit about the mission of the Indiana Agricultural Law Foundation, how that operates, and what your role is as the director.
Thank you, Garrett. Great to be here. The foundation was created by Indiana Farm Bureau. Essentially, we do two things. We do educational programming. Today, I think, is a topic that we really focus on. And a good example, we also get involved in precedent-setting litigation impacting Indiana agriculture.
And what's that look like for you on a day-to-day?
A lot of variation. A lot of times your day can change with a phone call. A case is at a point where there is a request for funding, maybe a call from a member with a general legal question. You just never know what's going to come up.
Great. Keep you on your toes. And then Clint, tell us about your role as an attorney in the estate planning world. Is that something you've always wanted to practice? If not, how did you kind of end up there?
Sure, appreciate that. Unlike John and the general mission of your organization, I don't I guess I should say I try to avoid anything regarding litigation, right? And so my purpose on this earth is to help farm families through business solutions and through general succession planning, transition planning, estate planning, whatever you want to call it. To answer your question, Garrett, I came into this role actually later in life. So for 10 years, I spent my time managing egg retail locations, selling feed, fertilizer, seed, chemical, that kind of stuff, and ended up working one-on-one with farmers and some ranchers up here in South Dakota, really on the business side of things and trying to get them to understand more of the business management realm. And what I found quickly was that, man, there's a lot of need in the succession planning, the transition planning world. And that ultimately kind of led me to law school. And so I was one of those old people in law school that nobody wanted in my class, who asked questions and actually answered questions when they were asked, because I was in my early 30s and everybody else was, early 20s and just wanted to get the heck out of class. But all that to kind of lead up to what I do day to day is helping farm families work through, what does it look like to transfer a farm business to the next generation or to a independent third party, a non-related third party. But what are the legal tools? What are the business aspects that we need to approach in order to make that effective, with trying to avoid as much of the family drama and as much as of the other issues that often come up as it relates to succession planning and estate planning. And so that's what I do now as an attorney in South Dakota. And I take a little bit of a different, maybe a unique approach to conversations with farm families, because ultimately I'm looking at this going, I think we ought to focus on preserving family farms in the US, and how do we best accomplish that? And that's through a solid transition plan. And so that's what I do on a day-to-day basis.
That's great. Well, sounds like you're very needed in what you do. So that's I know that's why the estate and succession planning event has been so popular for Farm Bureau because a lot of families need it. So transitioning then to John, can you talk a little bit about that program that we do? I know you just wrapped up your 11th year of the event last month. So why did the Ag Law Foundation start the program and why has it continued since?
Heidi, I think we, as you said, we recognize the need, and the foundation tries to come up with programming that impacts a lot of people. This is a great example because every single farm in the state is impacted by estate planning, by succession planning. Something's going to happen, as Clint referenced. It may be transitioned to the next generation. It may be offered for sale to a third party. And we wanted to create a program that I think really did two things. Number one, we wanted to get into the nuts and bolts of this is a will, this is a trust, this is a power of attorney. A lot of people, need some education on that. It's not something they deal with every day. And then more interesting to me was this idea that family dynamics, family communication plays an essential role in this. And I think back 11 years ago, there were just a few people out there talking about that aspect of succession planning. We've tried over the years to bring a number of speakers into our program that really emphasize on and focus on that aspect of succession planning.
So, John, one more here for you. Somebody's never attended, never watched, our program. Kind of what's it set up like? It's a morning program. Kind of walk them through what they might expect.
Sure. It's changed like a lot of things post-COVID. Initially, I remember our first program was in the office here at Indiana Farm Bureau. I think maybe we had maybe 50, 60 people there. Fast forward to last year, I think we had over 400 folks register for a digital program. Content-wise, I think, it's varied depending on the issues of the day. Maybe there's a proposed or existing change to tax law. A lot of things in estate planning, especially, need to be kept up to date on. Things change. There's a lot of variation. So we've tried to keep pace with the issues of the day, but always sprinkling in for those first time attendees, again, the basics of an estate plan, even some definitional stuff so that people have their eyes wide open maybe when they schedule that appointment with the attorney as to what some of these things mean.
That's great because, farmers are generally not attorneys. So I think that's great that you kind of go through those basics because I know I wouldn't understand them unless you explain them to me. So, Clint, back to you. What would you say are some of the most common pitfalls or stumbling blocks that people find themselves running into when it comes to estate planning? Is there kind of a universal thing that most people want to try?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. And to kind of piggyback off of what John just said, one of the fundamental, I guess, pitfalls or misconceptions out there is that an estate plan is the same as a succession plan or a transition plan. And so the first and foremost thing that I talk with folks about is an estate plan is what happens to your property after you pass away. Your succession plan, your transition plan is how are we transferring management and ownership over our lifetime and or after we pass away. And so it is such a broad scope to tackle. And to your point, Heidi, of what are these kind of universal truths? One is that every state has various laws and regulations regarding a lot of the legal details. But frankly, the majority of the conversations that I have with farm folks is not legal specifics. It is how are we communicating? What are these family dynamics? How can we effectively build an attractive farm business to then transition? And how are we handling various conversations that need to happen throughout the entire succession plan, transition plan. And so oftentimes what that looks like is the owner generation comes in and the successor generation comes in, and we just have these conversations. And so a lot of actually what I do is not legal expertise or legal advice or working on the documents. That kind of comes at the end of the overall planning session. And so I think that generally speaking, to answer your question, Heidi, it's these universal truths are more conversation is generally better. We need to look at a transition over time while we're alive versus just relying on an estate plan. And then I guess kind of the last thing is we need buy-in from both generations in order to effectively have a successful transition. So those are kind of the three universal truths that I like to talk about and I like to kind of focus on. And then we can dive into the nitty-gritty of the legal aspects.
That's great. So I think it's kind of maybe a two-pronged question here, or you've kind of answered part of it at the start. Somebody attended, our event, and maybe now they're on fire to get some of this planning underway. I guess the first steps would be a lot of those conversations within the family and then maybe an initial conversation with you. But beyond that, what are those steps, or what things should people be gathering to bring to some of these meetings? Or it kind of seems like a lot to wrap your head around. So what would set somebody up for success as far as that's concerned?
Yeah, great question. The number one question that I get, and probably John would echo this, is we want to do something, we just don't know where to start, right? And so for me, it is recommending that they talk to somebody who has experience in farm succession planning, farm estate planning in their area, but actually has ag experience, because there's these various nuances that we see in ag as it relates to relationships, as it relates to the sentimental value of farmland, and trying to understand what is fair versus equal versus equitable, to leave to the next generation, right? All of these things are inherent parts of ag that maybe aren't necessarily as pervasive in other areas of industry. So one, finding that advisor, that person who is going to be able to help walk you through this process. Number two, it is daunting, but I like to look at things, try to simplify as best as possible. And by doing so, I look at these things in basically a succession plan in three kind of categories. One is the first step is, let's take an inventory. Let's understand what we own. This is all of the things that we have, how are things legally titled? Let's gather information. Step two is, what are our goals and objectives, not only from the owner generation, but also from that successor generation. Let's see where we're aligned, where we differ, and then let's work on kind of this overall idea, this plan together. And then that third phase, third step is ultimately bringing in those advisors. John, you had mentioned on tax, right? So we want to bring in our tax advisors. We want to bring in legal counsel. We want to bring on, life insurance and other insurance providers, these professionals who are going to be part of putting the actual documents together and then following that through with a written transition plan to facilitate it. So I try to boil these things down into these three basic phases and steps, and that helps farm folks to kind of wrap their head around, okay, I'm in this phase one. I'm gathering information, I'm starting the conversations, and then, laying it out going forward.
So we're talking about getting prepared for all of this. When should people, is there a certain milestone, a certain age that I know you'd never know what's going to happen. So it's not like, oh, at this I don't know if you have a specific age that you normally tell people if you're an owner and you hit this milestone that you should be having the conversation by now. Is there, or I know it's not a one size fits all, but
Yeah, for me, a lot of my professional life is dealing in estate planning. And I say, if you are over the age of 18, and that's it. If you're over the age of 18, you ought to have some kind of an estate plan in place. Sometimes that is the essentials. That's just a basic will, some basic powers of attorney that say, if I were to pass, here's what I want to have happen with my property. And oftentimes, people don't realize that there is a plan in place, and that is outlined by the state. And there's a default plan there in case something were to happen. Uh, Heaven forbid we would pass away. The state has kind of this default plan for you. So I say start at 18 years old and get this basic estate plan in place, knowing that it's a living, breathing plan going forward. We have children, young families. We ought to have some conservators. We need to have guardians in place to as part of our estate plan. And then as we work for building net worth, building assets, having this, all of these, call them burdens, call them benefits to our lives as we kind of progress throughout our career, then that's when it's time to look for more sophisticated, you might call them, plans that might use entities, that might use trusts, it might have all of these other options available. But ultimately, let's have a basic estate plan when we're 18. And then as we are progressing and we're bringing on that next generation, now is the time to put in place a plan that will allow flexibility to be modified going forward.
How often do you look at modifying that? Say you have a pretty robust plan, and John had kind of mentioned some of that is what has been taught in the past is that process of reviewing and touching base back with the family every so often. What's that kind of look like on your end?
Yeah, as it relates to that kind of that owner generation and their estate succession plan, I want to see, one, we're actually looking at it at least anytime a major life event happens. I mean, I recommend annually we dust it off, look at it, say, has anything changed? If not, cool, we'll just let it ride for another year. But for sure, at the bare minimum, anytime a life event happens, that could be one of our kids gets married. We have a grandchild who hits 18 years old. We have purchased more assets. We now have a lake house. Let's review that and see, is this part of our trust plan? Is this part of our overall, idea? And so I say anytime major life events happen, ideally annually, but that's just not practical oftentimes. And as a young person, every 3-5 years, but for sure when we bring new kids into the world, when we buy major assets, when unfortunately a divorce happens or somebody passes away, right? Those are the major life events that often trigger a review of our estate succession plan.
Makes sense. So, John, I know this particular estate planning event has been in place for 11 years, like we said. And Indiana Farm Bureau and the Ag Law Foundation are taking the next step in the fall. Can you tell us more about the more in-depth estate planning program that you guys are planning for, and what type of attendees are you looking to attract? What will that event cover?
Sure. Survey work done by Indiana Farm Bureau revealed something I think we all knew. There is even increasing interest in this subject matter. And while we've had success and I think done a lot of good with our estate and succession planning for the family farm, we sense that people wanted a little bit more. And this fall, we've done just that. More details to come, but the idea is that we could get a small group of families that come here to the headquarters of Indiana Farm Bureau in Indianapolis, spend the better part of the day with us and a facilitator, and really dig into a lot of the issues that Clint talked about. Now, they're not going to leave with a will, a trust, a power of attorney, those kind of things. But our hope is that they leave with a plan. Here's what we need to do tomorrow. Here's what we need to do next week, and so forth. And again, in consideration of a lot of these issues, in consideration with the aspirations, the concerns of the family, we hope to reveal those. And again, walk away with something that's more in depth than our estate planning program has been over the last 11 years. And we really look forward to it, and certainly stay tuned as we get all of the details put together through all of the Indiana Farm Bureau channels. You'll definitely know about it.
For sure. I know we're working on that pretty closely together, John and I. So, yep, keep an eye out at infb.org/events as that gets closer, and like you said, other publications. Thank you both so much for joining us today, and for the work that you do to help farm families plan for the future. And if you're interested in watching the estate and succession planning for the family farm event that Clint presented at and that John kind of took the reins at, along with Maria and some other people on his team, you can find that at infb.org/recordings.
Thank you so much, Clint. Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Thanks, team. Appreciate it.
If you enjoyed our conversation today, make sure to subscribe to The Breakdown with INFB and even rate and review us to let us know how we're doing. For more information, visit www.infb.org/podcast.